And we're inching closer and closer to the Republican presidential caucuses in Iowa, which are now set to take place on January the 3rd. And the rest of the primary calendar is now beginning to take shape as New Hampshire is expected to announce that voting will take place on January the 10th. The South Carolina primary will follow on the 21st, and Florida at the end of the month. And as the clock ticks, the candidates are jockeying for position. Now, among them is Texas Congressman Ron Paul, whose support remains as fierce as ever. And he appeared yesterday morning on Meet the Press and floated some very provocative ideas on how to save money. Let's take a look.
As you well know, you have a lot of support among young people.
That's right.
They're borrowing to pay for college at record levels. Would you abolish all federal student aid?
Eventually, but my program doesn't do it. There's a transition in this.
But that's your ultimate aim.
Yes, because there's no authority to do this. And just think of all this willingness to want to help every student get a college education. So they're $1 trillion in debt. We don't have any jobs for them. The quality of education has gone down, so it's a failed program. I went to school when we had none of those.
And joining me now to lay out his strategy for victory is the man himself, presidential candidate, Texas Congressman Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Sean. Good to be with you.
All right. When you laid out your plan, I mean, here we've got, at the end of this last budget deal, it's going to be $16.7 trillion in debt. We're robbing from our kids and grandkids. You have said this from the very beginning. Cal Thomas was telling me you actually had a billboard back years ago about the government, and it said, let's put big government on a diet or something to that effect.
Right. We had a fat Uncle Sam, put big government on a diet.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that was in '76. Things not only haven't changed, they've gotten dramatically worse. You've come up with a plan I actually support. You want to cut $1 trillion. How fast can you do it? Where would that money come from?
Well, of course, it all depends on the people's understanding and the Congress willing to go with this. But you could do it at one time. People say, well, it's impossible to do this. But we had a pretty good history of slashing spending after World War II. We brought 10 million people home, and we slashed spending by more than 50% and cut taxes, and the economy was revived. So you don't have to wait. But my program is designed to do it. Like I said in that little clip there, that, yes, student loans should be phased out. It doesn't close them down right away, and there's a fund that will tide some people over. But it is a failed program, and my argument is that it's unconstitutional, and so much that we do now, not only is it unconstitutional, but we don't have the money. So I think the question is how serious do the other candidates and the people of this country think this debt is? I happen to think it's very serious. Like Cal pointed out, I was concerned in the 70s because I thought the situation was set up because of the change in the monetary system that it would end that it would lead to endless spending and endless debt, and that's where we are. So I think we have to take this very seriously.
Do you think you could knock $1 trillion off the top? Do you think you could do it in year one or within 2 years? How long do you think it would take you to say, wait a minute? Because right now we borrow 40 cents of every dollar. We take in 2.2, we spend 3.7. It's unsustainable. So how quickly do you think you could knock off $1 trillion in spending?
Well, my program says in 1 year, but you have to be willing to do it, obviously, and you have to think that cutting is less painful than runaway inflation and having another downgrade on our credit, which is about to come soon. So, yes, but, I list 5 departments to cut out, too. So, no, I'm not bashful about cutting spending, but it's just that I see this sovereign debt crisis worldwide is much more serious than anybody wants to admit. The other candidates aren't offering really any cuts. I don't think anybody in Washington is offering an actual cut. It's always the cut and the proposed increases. And so far, the markets haven't been reassured and people haven't gone back to work and thought, well, we have things under control. So that's why I think it's so serious.
All right, I got one question of a personal nature for you. I have said for years that I think you have been somebody that has been, out there warning of the dangers of big government and the Fed. I'm not a fan of Bernanke. I'm not a fan of Tim Geithner. I'm not a fan of monetary policy in this country. I think we could do a lot better. I've said this for years. I'm a supporter of the McPenny plan, which will freeze spending at 2011 levels, cut it 1% a year for 6 years, and then for the next 2 years, keep it at 18% of GDP. You told me the other day you think that's probably a good idea, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make the point quite as dramatically as I make it because I think it's so serious. But if I couldn't get my plan passed, that would be certainly a lot better than what we're doing. It would reassure the markets to some degree, and it would be worthwhile. And I think that
listen,
some people would be less.
I'd say we got to balance the budget. We got to live within our means immediately. All right, but then you went out, you were asked a question by a reporter. Do you think people like me and Rush and Mark Levin fear that you are making us obsolete because your views reveal them as status? And I've been called a lot of things, Dr. Paul. I've never been called a status before. And your answer was, well, I think if I gain influence, it's an embarrassment to them because they're not really limited government people, yet they make their livelihood fooling people into thinking that they're the real leaders of limited government. And I'm thinking, I agree with you on cutting $1 trillion. I agree with the McPenny plan. I thought Republicans spend too much money, and this president is 4 times worse. Where did that statement come from?
Well, I think somebody put those words in my mouth and I didn't deny it because I think in many ways what I've talked about for 40 years now is now becoming pretty conventional, you know, with the monetary policy and auditing the Fed and really cutting. So I do think that indirectly I do put a lot of pressure on them. But if you look at it, I didn't go out and volunteer this, but I do think that there hasn't been anybody really leading the charge and saying, look, this is serious. We need to cut. So sometimes I think there are a lot of, and I deal with a lot of so-called conservatives in Washington, and Sean, you know they're not as conservative as they pretend to be, or we wouldn't be in this mess.
But I mean, look at what happened. Ever since I was on radio and TV, I have used government waste, the Citizens Against Government Waste. I've talked about money that has been mismanaged, misappropriated. I didn't even support prescription drug plans when Republicans were spending too much money. In the latter years of the Bush years, when 2006, 7, and 8 came along, I said they're spending too much money, as did a lot of conservatives like Mark and Rush. So I thought that charge was unfair. Here's my one area of disagreement with you. We'll move on from me. I look at what's happened in Libya, and I don't think this president thinks through what he's doing. I never thought the Arab Spring was going to be the democracy movement that it is, that they claimed it would be, rather. I'm worried about Islamic extremism. What is your answer? I mean, I know you want to cut defense. I know you want to pull the United States back from a lot of these areas, but don't we need to be proactive in going at them? You seem to believe that we're causing it by being involved in any way. Wouldn't that be putting our head in the sand in terms of extremists that already have had a desire to kill us and have shown so?
No, I think it always backfires on us. Tunisia has just had an election, and they're going to have radical Islamists in. Libya is probably going to end up with them. Look at all this buying of friendship with Egypt. Now we're going to have a government there that's less friendly to Israel. We have the Kurds under attack now by both the Turks and the Iranians. So and we're driving these people into the arms of the Chinese. So I think this hurts Israel. I think it hurts our national defense. Besides, Sean, we're broke, and I want to cut this military. You said I want to cut defense. I don't. I want to cut military. Even with my cuts, we're going to have 5 times as much as China spends on their military. Nobody's arming themselves to invade this country, and I do not believe that we should be in nation building, and we should not be involved in the entangling alliance and the internal affairs of other nations. It's not part of our Constitution, and it was also strongly advised by our founders, and Eisenhower warned us to stay out of these entangling alliances. Robert Taft, the famous Mr. Republican, he says don't even get in NATO. But Sean, this policy now, they get the authority from NATO and United Nations. They don't even.
We are NATO.
Obama doesn't even come.
But we are NATO.
I know, but how about the Congress? Don't you care about the Congress? I mean, I just don't think that. I think Congress. Okay, then we don't need. What my point is we don't need entangling alliances. I don't want the president to defer and get his authority from NATO and United States. If we need a war, it should come to the Congress. We should declare it, and you and I shouldn't have any debate whatsoever. We should say, let's go in. That was my acceptance. You know,
well, Congress can defund any war. Congress can defund. The president is the commander in chief, so they're very, very strong
Right.
constitutional distinctions. But, all right, Congressman, we'll have you back. You're welcome anytime.
You know why? They don't do that because if you do fund it, you say you are unpatriotic and you're opposed to the troops. So once the war starts, it never has happened where they defund it.
All right. Good to see you, Congressman. We'll be watching, and we appreciate you being on the show with us. Thank you.
Okay.